I didn't know the night would matter until I started replaying it in my head, the way you do with moments that refuse to stay quiet. At the time, it felt ordinary, another weekday unwinding into evening, another small favor between roommates. Looking back, it was the first hairline crack. My name is Ethan, and at 26, I thought I had my life arranged into neat, manageable boxes. I was openly gay, emotionally careful, and proud of the distance I kept between myself and complicated situations. Lucas, my roommate, fit easily into that structure. We were the kind of friends who shared groceries and streaming passwords, not secrets. He was 27, athletic in an unshowy way, and effortlessly social, someone who made people feel at ease without trying. He also had a girlfriend. Maya existed in our apartment like a polite ghost. Her framed smile sat on Lucas's desk. Her voice floated through the hallway when he took calls. She visited on weekends when work allowed, bringing takeout and warmth, never overstaying her welcome. I liked her. That fact mattered to me more than I admitted. Lucas and I had been roommates for nearly a year. We'd settled into a rhythm that felt safe, gym schedules, late dinners, mutual respect for closed doors. He knew I was gay, I knew he was straight. The clarity of that line had always been comforting. It meant I could admire him without consequence, appreciate his laugh without interpretation. Boundaries, when honored, are a relief. That evening began like many others. Rain ticked against the windows, and the apartment smelled faintly of the pasta Lucas had overcooked. We were both worn down from work, stretched thin in the way that makes silence feel earned. Lucas sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, shoulders tight, jaw clenched in a way I recognized but hadn't asked about. "You any good with back rubs?" he asked, half joking, eyes still on the screen. I laughed. "I'm not a miracle worker. Didn't ask for one," he said. "Just a little help." There was nothing unusual in the request itself. We were friends, adults. He'd asked before, usually after leg day, usually with the same careless tone. I hesitated anyway, a pause so small it probably didn't show. Then I agreed, because saying no felt dramatic, and because I trusted the line we'd never crossed. He turned, leaning forward. I stood behind the couch, hands light, professional in my restraint. I focused on the mundane, pressure, posture, the rhythm of easing tension. Lucas exhaled, a long breath that sounded like relief more than comfort. "Long day?" I asked. "Long month," he said. "Everything feels loud lately." That was new. Lucas wasn't prone to confession. I said nothing, letting the quiet hold us. The rain grew steadier. The room seemed to narrow, not physically, but in the way attention does when it sharpens. "You ever feel like you're doing everything right," he continued, "and it still doesn't fit?" I knew he was talking about work. Or Maya. Or something he hadn't named yet. I also knew I was listening too closely. When I stopped, he didn't move right away. The pause stretched. Not awkward, charged. He turned his head just enough for me to see his expression. Thoughtful, unguarded, unfamiliar. Our eyes met, and the air between us changed temperature. "Thanks," he said quietly. I stepped back, suddenly aware of my own heartbeat. Lucas stood, rolled his shoulders, and smiled, his usual easy grin snapping back into place like a mask. He grabbed a glass of water, asked if I wanted one. Normality reasserted itself with practiced ease. Later, in my room, I lay awake listening to the rain thin out. I told myself nothing had happened. That was true, technically. But something had shifted, something subtle and unsettled. The line was still there, but I could feel how close we'd come to noticing it. I didn't know then how fragile that distance was. I only knew I wouldn't forget the way the room had gone quiet, or how easily silence had invited something more. The days after that night slipped back into routine, but the routine felt rehearsed, as if both Lucas and I were reading from a script we hadn't written. We still shared breakfast counters and sarcastic comments about the news. We still passed each other in the hallway with casual nods. Yet beneath the ordinary, something hummed, low, persistent, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. Lucas grew quieter, not withdrawn, exactly, but selective. He lingered in doorways when he spoke to me, as if deciding whether to step closer or turn away. His phone buzzed more often, and when it did, his jaw tightened before he answered. I didn't need to see the screen to know it was Maya. One evening, close to midnight, I found him on the balcony, city lights reflecting off the glass like scattered coins. He didn't turn when I slid the door open. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He shook his head. Didn't try. I joined him, careful to keep space between us. The air was cool, clean. For a moment, we stood in companionable silence, the kind that had always come easily before. Maya thinks I'm distant, he said at last. She's not wrong. I waited. This felt like one of those moments where speaking too soon could tilt the ground. I don't know how to explain it, Lucas continued. I care about her. I do. But lately, everything feels expected. Like I'm playing a role I agreed to without reading the whole script. There it was, the vulnerability he'd hinted at before. I wanted to be responsible, to redirect him, to remind him of the life he'd chosen. Instead, I listened. Listening is a deceptively active choice. I don't think people talk enough about how confusing it can be, I said carefully. Wanting stability and still feeling restless. He looked at me then, really looked, as if weighing the cost of the conversation against the relief of honesty. You make it sound simple. It's not, I said. Just familiar. From that night on, our conversations deepened. We talked while washing dishes, while folding laundry, while the rest of the world slept. Lucas shared doubts he'd never voiced, and I shared pieces of myself I usually kept guarded, past relationships, the discipline it took to want someone you couldn't have and choose restraint anyway. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was advising caution while drifting closer with every word. Maya's presence pressed in from the edges. Her name surfaced more often, usually paired with frustration. Missed calls became arguments. Arguments became silences that followed Lucas into the apartment like a shadow. I caught myself resenting her for it, then hating myself for the resentment. She hadn't done anything wrong. Neither, I reminded myself, had I. Still, there were moments that tested that certainty. A brush of hands reaching for the same mug. A laugh that lingered too long. One night, during a power outage, we sat on the couch lit by our phones, knees nearly touching. Lucas leaned back, his shoulder grazing mine, and didn't move away. You ever wonder, he asked softly, how different things could have been if you'd met someone at the wrong, all right, time? I swallowed. All the time. The answer felt like a confession, even though it was true in 100 harmless ways. Lucas shifted, just enough to make the contact unmistakable. My heart thudded, loud in my ears, but I stayed still. So did he. The moment passed, unresolved, but it left a mark. After that, I started measuring my days by his moods. When Lucas laughed, the apartment felt lighter. When he withdrew, I felt the absence like a physical ache. I told myself it was empathy, not attachment. A lie repeated often enough can sound like wisdom. The line between us remained unbroken, but it was thinning, stretched by unspoken possibilities. I knew, with a clarity that frightened me, that if Lucas asked again, not for a favor, not for advice, but for something more, I wasn't sure I'd remember why saying no mattered. As I turned out the lights one night, the thought settled heavily in my chest: boundaries don't disappear all at once. They erode, quietly, until one day you realize you're standing where you promised you never would. The apartment began to feel like a held breath. Lucas moved through it with a restlessness that unsettled me, opening cabinets without taking anything, pacing the length of the hallway, stopping mid-sentence as if he'd forgotten what he meant to say. I told myself it was none of my business. I told myself that often, and each time it rang less true. Maya's voice came through the walls one evening, sharper than usual. I wasn't trying to listen, but some arguments demand an audience. Lucas stood in his room with the door half closed, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand rubbing at the back of his neck. I caught fragments, space, pressure, I don't know. When the call ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the raised voices. He didn't come out right away. When he finally did, his expression was stripped of its usual composure, like someone who'd taken off armor they didn't know how to put back on. Want to sit? I asked. Lucas nodded, dropping onto the couch with a tired exhale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The television was off. The city outside hummed faintly. Everything seemed to narrow down to the space between us. I'm messing things up, he said. I chose my words carefully. You're trying to understand yourself. He shook his head. That's the excuse I keep using. There was a finality in his tone that made my stomach tighten. I waited, letting him find the shape of what he needed to say. When he looked at me again, his eyes held something raw and searching. I don't think I'm as straight as I've always said I was, Lucas said quietly. The admission landed between us, fragile and dangerous. I felt a dozen responses rise and fall inside me, questions, warnings, reassurances. I settled on honesty. You don't have to label anything, I said. You just have to be careful with people's hearts, including your own. He laughed once, humorless. That's the problem. I don't know how to be careful anymore. The room felt warmer, the air thicker. Lucas leaned forward, elbows on his knees, then sat back again, restless. His knee brushed mine, and this time neither of us pretended it was accidental. I think about you, he said, the words tumbling out as if he'd lost control of them. More than I should. More than makes sense. My pulse roared in my ears. I knew what the right response was, the responsible one. I also knew how badly I wanted to hear him say my name like that again. Lucas, I said, low and steady, you have a girlfriend. I know, he replied immediately. That's why this feels wrong. And honest, both at the same time. The contradiction sat there, undeniable. I stood, creating distance because I needed it to think. Lucas watched me, his gaze following every movement, and the intensity of it made my resolve waver. I don't want to hurt Maya, I said. I don't want to be someone's mistake. He stood too, closing the space I'd tried to create. This doesn't feel like a mistake, he said. It feels like something I've been avoiding. We were too close now. I could see the uncertainty etched into his expression, the fear, the hope. The choice hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. No one pushed. No one stumbled. Whatever happened next would be deliberate. I thought of Maya's smile in the photo on his desk. I thought of every careful decision I'd made to protect myself from exactly this moment. I thought of how tired Lucas looked, how honest. This changes things, I said. Yes, he agreed. That's why I needed to say it. For a long second, neither of us moved. Then Lucas reached out, not urgently, not possessively, his hand hovering, waiting. I didn't pull away. The contact was brief, restrained, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken. When we finally stepped back, the air felt charged, unsettled. Nothing irreversible had happened. Not yet. But the truth was out now, and truth has momentum. As I retreated to my room that night, heart racing, one thought followed me into the dark. Once desire is named, pretending it doesn't exist becomes the hardest lie of all. Morning arrived without relief. The apartment looked the same, sunlight slanting across the counter, the hum of traffic below, but the ease we'd once shared was gone. Lucas avoided my eyes as he poured coffee, his movements precise, deliberate, like someone trying not to spill something already cracked. I'm going to be out late, he said, voice neutral. I nodded, unsure what response wouldn't sound loaded. The door closed behind him with a soft finality that lingered in the room. The day stretched on, heavy with unsaid things. I replayed the night before, not for what had happened, but for what almost had. Naming desire hadn't solved anything, it had sharpened the problem, turned ambiguity into obligation. I wondered how many lives were rearranged by moments that stopped just short of action. Lucas didn't come home until well after dark. When he did, his shoulders were slumped, the confidence he wore so easily now threadbare. He set his keys down carefully, as if noise might undo him. I talked to Maya, he said. I felt the words land before I understood them. How did it go? He considered me, weighing honesty against self-protection. I told her I've been confused. That I need time. Not the whole truth, but closer than before. I respected the restraint, even as guilt pricked at me for wanting more. She asked if there was someone else, Lucas continued. I said no. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was crowded with implications. I wanted to protest, to insist I hadn't asked for this, that I hadn't crossed the line. Instead, I said the only thing that felt useful. You didn't lie to protect me, I said. You did it to protect yourself. He nodded slowly. I don't know who I am right now. The admission was raw, unguarded. I recognized the temptation to step into that uncertainty, to offer myself as an answer. But answers given too soon often cost more than they save. We need space, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. At least until you figure out what you want, and what you're willing to risk. Lucas looked at me for a long moment. Then he exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders. You're right, he said. I was hoping you'd say something else. Me too, I admitted. The days that followed were quieter. Lucas spent more time out, more time alone when he was home. We spoke politely, briefly, circling each other like planets whose gravity had shifted. I missed him in small, inconvenient ways, the shared jokes, the unthinking comfort. Missing him felt like punishment I'd earned. One evening, he knocked on my door. "I'm moving out," he said. "Just for a while." I felt the news settle, a mix of relief and loss. "Okay, I don't want this place to keep reminding us of what we didn't finish," Lucas added. "Or what we might." I nodded, grateful for the care beneath the decision. He smiled then, soft and sincere, the version of him I'd always trusted. It hurt more than anger would have. When he left a week later, the apartment grew larger, quieter. I packed away the stray reminders, his mug, the extra blanket on the couch. Life resumed its shape, altered but intact. I thought often of Maya, of the unseen consequences rippling outward. Infidelity doesn't require touch to leave a mark. Sometimes, the damage is done in restraint, in the choices we flirt with but never fully claim. Months later, Lucas sent a message. Just a check-in. No promises, no regrets laid bare. I replied kindly, briefly. Some connections are meant to teach, not continue. Looking back, I understand now that what changed wasn't a single moment, but the slow surrender to possibility without responsibility. Desire is easy to romanticize when it feels rare and honest. Boundaries are harder. They ask for patience, for courage, for the willingness to walk away from what feels good in order to protect what matters. I don't regret choosing restraint. I regret how close I came to forgetting why it mattered.